Hello there everyone and welcome back to another episode of Tutorials and Tours in Better Than Wolves. My name's Gord. I'll be your host today. We're in our LP world, multiplayer world. I'm just sort of in the process of preparing myself mentally to start setting up the sorting system over at the mob system over there. And I thought it'd be valuable just to quickly go over the basics of sorting in Better Than Wolves, because there's a lot of options. So, of your sorting options, the hopper is probably the most versatile. The hopper it collects items, basically. You throw items at it, and stuff falls into it. It collects it, it holds it. If you power it, it can drop stuff. If you fill it all the way up, I don't have anything to show it. You heard that click? It generates a redstone signal when it is completely full, which can be very useful for signaling and all sorts of stuff like that. Anyways, this box right here is the filter box. Excuse me. It allows you to control what can or cannot go into the hopper, and each filter has different properties. Now, these properties are not traditional Minecraft properties. They're properties coded by Flowerchild specifically for the mod because they make sense based on the differences between the items. So the ladder is very simple. It stops anything that's a block. Anything that's a block just stops right there, except sand apparently. That's interesting. That's very interesting. Okay, except sand apparently, but most blocks. This will include mob heads, but anything that's an item will fall into the hopper. So that's one. That's the hopper that it allows some of the biggest stuff through. Iron bars will stop anything that can't stack. So weapons, armor, other funny entities like boats. Boats shouldn't go through. Anything that can't stack, generally speaking. Now, these are all generalities. There are exceptions. Either most likely things that either there are reasons, like the sand here, or something that's just been added, and who knows. But generally speaking, anything that creates a stack, like blocks, well, blocks don't go through. That's because this is, I guess, narrower than this. So, but anything that generates stacks will generally, for the most part, go through the iron bars. Potions will go through the iron bars. Trapdoors. So, generally speaking, this is again, not 100%, things that stack to 64 will be stopped. Things that stack to 16 things that stack to 64 will go through. The theory being that they're smaller. So bones will go through. But sandwiches, which are a food item and of course stack to 16 and Better Than Wolves, don't go through. Creeper oysters only stack to 16, but they go through, so there's obviously some exceptions to this rule. Potions don't go through. So on and so forth. So, grates. They stop large things and allow small things. The definition of large and small is pretty much entirely defined by Flowerchild, but bat wings are small. Bones are large. Arrows, unfortunately, are also large. Rotten flesh is large. Creeper oysters are small, of course. Yeah, so that's the grate. The specifics I'll go over in a later episode when I actually start discussing how my sorting system is going to be rigged up. But this is just to give you this is just a briefing on sorting. Wicker. Wicker allows powders. Now, creeper oysters, funny as it would be, are not a powder. But niter is a powder. These apparently are not powders. I'm not sure if that's an oversight or not, but so piles of gravel are not a powder, but piles of dirt are. Interesting. That could be useful. That also could be just an oversight. Doesn't matter. No big deal. The only thing that, because since we're dealing with mob items, the fact that Niter goes through. It's one of the few mob items that will go through here. The other neat property of Wicker is it can take gravel, breaks it down into sand and flint, which is really useful for manufacturing arrows. Slats. This was a late edition. It stops thick things and allows thin things. Now this is really useful because if you play your cards right, arcane scrolls are thin, and I think I figured out a way to separate them from everything else in my sorting system, which I didn't have in one of the previous incarnations. But things like slats, or things like potions of instant healing, or bottles, or shovels and stuff are not. And of course soul sand. Soul sand is special. It is an XP sponge, so it takes the red dragon orbs and converts them into usable XP. It can also store said XP if you chain enough hoppers together, and that's going to be a massive project. So as you can see, it's a very elegant system. It requires some serious decision making, but the hoppers alone can't separate everything. But that's okay, because items in Better Than Wolves have 2 additional properties, and I'm a clumsy bugger. The first thing is buoyancy. Some things float, some things sink. So, stream of water, we've got hoppers in the bottom, and as you can see, as water flows, its depth decreases. So things that float will ride across the top of the water stream and won't enter the hopper until later in the stream. Things that sink will enter the first hopper. So an empty bottle, as you can see, it bounces to the top and floats. A full bottle goes into the first hopper. So right there, immediately there's a way to separate empty bottles and full bottles in a sorting system. Other useful properties along that line, arcane scrolls float. Now, we'll go over that in a second. Okay, so arcane scrolls, for general principles, float. Creeper oysters sink. Or no, they float. That's right, they float. It's hard to memorize this. Blocks, for the most part, will sink. Wood, I believe, floats. Boats, of course, float. So on and so forth. So, that brings me to the other concept. Sometimes you want items to sink at a certain time, and the way to make that happen is what's called undertow. So when water falls, like, say, this right here, we'll just block this up for a second. So that block is considered to have an undertow right now. So if I throw, see, the arcane scroll went right to the bottom, even though it's an item that floats, and I'll demonstrate that. It's because this block is flowing downwards. So you see, floats. But it does not float on that block right there because I created a downwards water flow by so that block is flowing downwards to fill this gap below, and thus it pulls the item down. And that's a way of controlling, making a floating item enter a hopper when you want it to, as opposed to having to wait until the water stream dies down. So that's buoyancy. Every item in the game has some sort of buoyancy characteristic. There's a third one called neutral buoyancy, but I'll be perfectly honest, I have not figured out how to use that effectively as of yet. So this brings us to our third and final sorting system. The bellows can blow items, and at some point, unbeknownst to me, the sophistication of this was increased quite dramatically. It used to be that some items were light and some items were heavy, which was all fine and dandy, but that was changed quite significantly. Now, items have 4 different characteristics when it comes to the bellows. So there we go. So there's light. There's normal items, there's light items, there's very light items and extremely light items. And each one will move a different distance based on that characteristic. So as you can see, bones are heavy, So there's your 4. So these all started right here. And as you can see, they've been separated into 4 separate groupings based on their weight characteristic. Whoops. Oh well. We'll do it again, because that's really fun to watch. So you got hemp, sugar, rotted arrows, arcane scrolls, niter, witchwort, and we'll throw down creeper, oysters, and bones as well. So all sorts of stuff, especially the arrows and the bones. This is the only way to separate arrows and bones, because their other characteristics are all identical. So as you can see, it takes time, but at the end, you've got things split up into 4 categories. The heavy items, call them slightly light, light, and very light. So arcane scrolls are very light. Now, one important thing about this is, I believe, and we're just going to do a quick test here just to wrap this up. I believe string has a different weight characteristic from the arcane scroll, which is how you would have to separate them, because I believe most of their other characteristics are identical. In my old system, that was one of the things that was causing me grief. I couldn't separate arcane scrolls from string, but that was quite a long time ago, so yeah. But so using a bellows now of course the actual process of collecting and gathering these things is a whole other job. It's putting them here, separating them, and process, and then recollecting them is a whole other task, and making sure they don't get mixed back up again. It's a big job. But there you go. So arcane scrolls are very light, and string is only light. So that is my whirlwind introduction to sorting. It's about all my throat can handle, thanks to my residual illness here, but this will lay the groundwork for the next episode of our main LP, where I'm going to talk about the actual mob sorting system and how to separate all the items in a mob system. So, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this quick introduction to sorting systems in Better Than Wolves. I will see you in the next episode. Bye for now.